Welcome to FPB's Meet the Candidates. This Cable 10 series allows you, the viewer, to get a closer look at our candidates who are running for office. We've taken questions from our viewers through social media, through email, and so we have a lot of interesting things to talk about and views and topics that are important to our community, and that's why we're going to hear from our candidate. This is all leading up to the general election, which is on November 8th. And today we're going to be talking to James Comer, who is going to be representing us in the 1st District of Congress. So welcome. Thanks for coming.
Thank you for having me.
All right. I'm going to ask you to tell us a little bit about yourself and your political path to here. Right. And then we'll get into why you're here and not Andy Barr.
Okay. Well, great. Good question. Well,
Okay.
I'm James Comer. Everybody calls me Jamie. I've been in Congress almost 6 years now, so 3 terms in the original 1st Congressional District. Prior to that, I was Commissioner of Agriculture, so I've been on this forum before running for Commissioner of Agriculture. Prior to that, I was in Frankfort for 11 years as state representative. So if you put the 11 years as state representative and 4 years as Commissioner of Agriculture, I was in Frankfort for 15 years working. Prior to that, in the real world, I'm a farmer. I've been a director of a bank for many years. I also own some restaurants and some other small businesses, so I have a pretty strong private sector background in private business as well as farming, and then always been active in the community. I'm former chamber president in Monroe County, and like I said, a 6-term state representative, 1-term commissioner of agriculture, now 3 terms in Congress.
Okay, so 3 terms in Congress. So you've been there 6 years.
6 years.
And you've been representing the folks in the 1st District.
Right.
And that's in West Kentucky.
Well, it goes all the way to Springfield, so
Okay.
Springfield's pretty close to Frankfort.
Okay.
Yeah.
So earlier this year, our legislature, the Kentucky legislature, did some redistricting.
Right.
And Franklin County got moved from the 6th District to the 1st District.
Right.
So how does that benefit Franklin Countyans to be in the 1st District rather than the 6th?
Well, right now, Franklin County's still in the 6th District. So I'll be on the ballot in the new district in November. If I'm elected, then I'll be the representative in January. Andy Barr's still the representative now. Every 10 years, the census comes out and you have to redistrict based on population. So the same things happened over the past century. East Kentucky and West Kentucky continue to lose population, and Central Kentucky continues to grow. So the same thing happened again. Andy Barr's district grew, obviously, because you have places like Scott County, you have places like Clark County and Woodford County that are really growing, and then, of course, parts of Kentucky aren't so fortunate. So they redraw the lines, and Andy shed some population, and he shed Franklin County. Everybody was talking about it, and my kids have always gone to school here. The 1st District goes right now to Washington County. I think a lot of that's been lost in translation. The Courier-Journal writes, well, the 1st District's Paducah and all that. For 40 years, the 1st District has included Lebanon and Marion County and part of Washington County. So we had to grow in population, the 1st Congressional District. And if you look, the only county between Washington County and Franklin County is Anderson County. So the 1st District almost has touched Franklin County for the last 40 years. People may not realize that, but it's not just West Kentucky. Most of the population's in Central Kentucky and Southern Kentucky. So that district's going to unfortunately continue to grow. Hal Rogers district's going to continue to grow. There were some, obviously some people filed a lawsuit about from Franklin County, some very partisan Democrats that didn't like the district.
So why do you think that is?
Well, right now you're in a district with Menifee County and Wolfe County. I can make a strong argument that Paducah and Henderson have more in common with Frankfort than Frenchburg and Campton, Kentucky. So a lot of people in Frankfort, they say, well, I've never been to Paducah or Henderson. Well, have you ever been to Frenchburg or Campton? Because that's in the 1st District too, or Stanton, or in places like that. So, there's no good way to do redistricting. Unfortunately, East Kentucky and West Kentucky are going to continue to shrink. Therefore, those districts are going to continue to grow. So you look at what's happened with Hal Rogers' district over the last 40 years. Every 10 years, he adds more counties. And he had to get some of Andy's counties too, because Andy Barr's district and Brett Guthrie's district. Brett has Bullitt County and Hardin County, you know, and Bowling Green, just that I-65 stretch there where there's been so much population. So he had to shrink too, and that's how the district ended up. But I'll conclude by saying this. My kids go to school in Frankfort. When I was elected Commissioner of Agriculture, I moved my family to Frankfort. When my 4 years was over, I tried to move them back to Monroe County, but they love Frankfort. They love going to school here.
Because it's great.
And they want to stay in Frankfort. So I feel like in the new redistricting, Frankfort's got someone with a vested, I own a house in Frankfort, pay taxes in Frankfort. My kids go to public schools in Frankfort. So we're very much part of this community in Frankfort.
Okay. Currently, you have a position in Congress as ranking member on the House Committee of Oversight and Reform. What does that mean?
Well, you know, another benefit I want to say for people if I become the congressman in Frankfort is, I'll be the only member from Kentucky that will be a chairman of a committee. If the polls are right and the House flips from Democrat to Republican, to be chairman of what I think will be the most high-profile committee in Congress next year, after just 6 years in Congress, is unprecedented.
So
it took Hal Rogers 36 years.
Well, that's
to become
my
chairman.
next. How were you able to get in that role?
I
as
just,
a
you
fairly
know,
new member?
it's not based on seniority. The Senate, everything is based on seniority. In the House, you run for the chairman of a committee or ranking member of a committee. And I ran and, you know, somehow was elected. So this committee will be the primary committee for investigations. We'll be conducting a lot of investigations with the origin of COVID, with you know, potential violations of the law by Hunter Biden. We'll also be looking at some of the problems on the southern border. We've had a lot of whistleblowers from Border Patrol that have come to us with problems because it's very frustrating for the employees and the law enforcement who are trying to secure that border and patrol that border where we have an open border policy in America. We'll also be doing things that won't be in the news a lot that are good things that the people in business won't. When you talk to anyone in business, you say, what's your biggest problem in Washington? They say it's regulations, it's compliance, it's navigating the bureaucracy. What I want to do as chairman of the House Oversight Committee is try to, number one, get the backs of the taxpayers because Washington is spending too much money. That's why we have inflation. And number two, try to reduce the rules and regulations. You look at, for the energy industry, for example, I think gas prices can be cheaper if we reduce the rules and regulations and make it easier to get permits to drill and to do fracking and to do things like that. And I think that the rules and regulations in this Biden administration are one of the reasons why we have higher gas prices. And hopefully we can undo that in January in a new Congress.
Okay. Would you agree that the political atmosphere in America is divided as it has ever been?
Absolutely.
And what do you plan to do to help build a consensus?
Yeah, well, we just got to go in and have people who are sincere about governing. You have members in both parties that I think are sincere and want to govern and want to compromise, because you have to compromise the way the system's built. You know, people say, oh, you know, don't bend on this, don't bend on that. The Senate, you're always going to have compromise in the Senate, because the Senate, it takes 60 votes to pass a bill. So there's never going to be a scenario where there's 60 members of one party in the U.S. Senate. That party also holds the White House and a majority in the House. So by design, the system is supposed to be somewhat bipartisan. So, you know, you have members of Congress that want to go on TV and they want to just bash the other side. They've never passed a bill, or they've never done anything like that. You can tell the effective members of Congress by the ones who rise to committee chairmanships and the ones who actually pass bills. If you have a member of your delegation who's always talking and on TV and tweeting about bills they filed, but yet they've never passed a bill, they're probably not an effective member of Congress. So I think that, you know, the voters have to figure out who's sincere about trying to govern and who's not, because America's 50-50.
So can you tell us a time that you've shown independence from your party on a major important issue?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, you look at the situation with the last presidential race. I mean, I voted to certify the election. That was not a popular vote in my congressional district. Donald Trump won my congressional district by 50 points. Yep. But, you know, the role of Congress is very clear. It's with respect to the Electoral College count. You know, when the 50 states certify the election, the election's over. So I took a lot of grief from my fellow Republicans for that vote. That was the most pro-Trump district in America that voted to certify. So, I do what I think's right. I got calls from very high-ranking Republicans in the Senate asking me to vote for the infrastructure bill. I did not do that because it's too much spending. So I can give you 1,000 times when I've bucked my party. But at the end of the day, I think the Republican Party is a whole lot more accurate and on top of what the people in Kentucky want than the Democrat Party.
Well, you did talk about certifying the election, and I know that you did that, but you've also made public statements about how you had concerns about election irregularities. So do you think the election was stolen?
I think there were problems with the election that have been fixed. The biggest problem with the election was how they loosened the absentee laws. I'm from Monroe County. I still have a house in Monroe County. I will always be a registered voter and a resident of Monroe County. 3 times in my lifetime, I just turned 50, 3 times in my lifetime, the feds have come in and arrested a significant percentage of our courthouse for election fraud. 100% of the time, the election fraud is on absentee voting. You have to have tight rules on absentee voting. And a lot of states, including Kentucky, loosened the absentee rules in the name of COVID. And you had states that were doing universal ballots, just mailing people ballots without them requesting it. You have to have tight rules on absentee voting or you will have fraud. And I think in some states, they did it, in the name of COVID, and the state legislatures authorized it. Kentucky state legislature authorized the change. I think they made some changes that gave Biden some advantages, but at the end of the day, that was legal.
I was going to say, are those were settled in court, though?
Look, I voted to certify. So at the end of the day, but there were problems with the election.
Okay.
And the problems were loose absentee laws. Now, when people say, the voting machines were hacked, there's no evidence of that. And I've said that on Fox News. I've said that on Newsmax. There's no evidence. But I will say that the absentee rules gave people who were voting absentees in densely populated areas in the cities a huge advantage to go in to say, public housing or whatever, where there's a lot of people concentrated and make a bunch of votes. So those changes they made in COVID in states like Arizona, Pennsylvania, and Georgia have been changed back. So I believe that we'll have a good, safe and secure election this November.
Okay. Well, on the day of certification, there was a lot of activity at the Capitol.
I was there.
Yeah, well, that's what I was going to ask you. Being there that day, what was your experience that day?
I was the only one from Kentucky on the floor when all heck broke loose. So, it was something. It was a sad day in the history of America. It never needs to happen again. It was. If anyone says they weren't concerned or a little spooked that day, they're not telling you the truth.
Yeah. So why do you think it happened?
I just think it was a rally that got out of hand. I don't think it was pre-planned. I've kept up with all the January 6th hearings and things like that. It's unfortunate that, I think everything they've done in the January 6th committee could have been done in the Oversight Committee, which is a credible committee.
Do you believe President Trump bears any responsibility for it at all?
Well, I don't know who bears responsibility for it. It was just an unfortunate event. I think there were mistakes with lapses in security. I think there were mistakes. I think people were misled on what Congress could actually do. Even if every Republican in the House of Representatives had voted to object, he still would have passed on a party line vote. So there was never a chance for Congress to overturn the Electoral College.
Right.
And that's something that I don't think a lot of the people who were there that day realized.
Because that's not what they were told.
Well, they for whatever reason they didn't.
So what can we do to make sure that never happens again?
Right. It never needs to happen again. And I think you see a lot tighter security around the Capitol. And I think that Capitol Police. I've been in several committee hearings and several private briefings with the Capitol Police, and I don't think that'll happen again.
Yeah. So you've talked about being on, the Oversight Committee. Right now, the Democrats currently have President Biden as the leader of their party.
Right.
Would you consider President Trump the leader of your party?
I think President Trump is the most prominent figure in the party. I think he is a leader in the Republican Party.
Do you have any concerns about the investigations against him right now?
Investigation? Yeah, I have concerns over raiding Mar-a-Lago. Okay. I don't think that the FBI handled that very well.
Okay.
I'm sure the president bears some responsibility for some of the things too, but at this point, there's a lot of distrust of the FBI among conservatives. I can tell you, I'm the point person. I'm the lead guy investigating the Hunter Biden potential wrongdoing and things like that. And I can tell you, there's a double standard with the FBI on how they've treated Trump versus how they've treated Joe Biden, Joe Biden's two brothers, and Hunter Biden. And more of that will come out in January.
Okay. So, would you support President Trump if he ran for president?
Well, we just have to see who's running.
Okay.
President Trump he would win my congressional district by a large margin.
Yeah.
I can tell you that.
Yeah. All right. Let's move a little bit to the economy.
Okay.
Polls show that the economy is the top issue for midterm voters, and 62% of Americans think that we are in a recession.
Right.
Across the country, we are facing unacceptably high inflation. And Republicans in Congress did not support President Biden's Inflation Reduction Act, which was recently passed. So what are your issues with that, and what would you do differently?
That's the worst named bill in the history of Congress. The Inflation Reduction Act will only increase inflation. You can't continue to spend more money in the government and expect to not have inflation. If you listen to the Federal Reserve, which is supposed to be an independent body, the Federal Reserve dictates interest rates. They speak in parables a lot, like in the Bible. And Jerome Powell, basically said in parables, if you continue to spend money before Congress in his last testimony, if you continue to spend money at this pace, we're going to continue to raise interest rates. Because the only way to stop inflation, there's two ways to stop inflation. Raise interest rates, which pushes the economy into a recession, or number two, stop government spending. You increase government spending when the economy's struggling. Our economy was on fire. It wasn't struggling. There's a misconception about the problems with the economy. The economy was on fire because it has been overstimulated, not just under Biden, but under the last three administrations. We've had tax cuts, we've had stimulus checks, you had things like PPP loans. Those things stimulate the economy. And you can't, and low interest rates stimulate the economy. So we have artificially stimulated this economy to the point to where we've got inflation now, which a lot of people have never lived through inflation. The only way to stop inflation is to reduce government spending and to raise interest rates. When you raise interest rates, you see what's happening with the housing market just in the Frankfurt area. You can talk to any real estate agent. It's grinded to a halt now because if someone was going to take a $300,000 mortgage, on a house in Franklin County, that monthly payment today is almost $300 more a month than it would have been 8 months ago. $300 a month times 12 months a year times 30 years. That's a lot of extra money on that poor young couple just getting started with a $300,000 mortgage. So you've got a situation where because of too much stimulus, because of too much government spending, we've got inflation. Therefore, seniors on fixed income are having a hard time paying their grocery bill, paying their electric bill, and it's only going to get worse if the government continues to spend too much money. That's why I voted against the Biden spending bill that they called the Inflation Reduction Act. It's not going to reduce inflation.
Well, part of that was a focus on clean energy and producing jobs for people in that field. A majority of Americans on both sides of the political spectrum believe Congress should be taking steps to deal with the threat of a warming planet. Here in Frankfurt, as in many communities across the nation, we are exploring options to expand renewable energy opportunities. Is this a priority for you? And how should the federal government aid in efforts to address climate change?
I'm a farmer, so I'm a conservationist. I love being outside. I like to golf. I like to hunt. I like to fish. So I'm a outdoorsman. The private sector is demanding that we have more electric vehicles, that we have more solar and wind, because the younger generation of people want this, right? So the government really doesn't have to come in and force this. I'll give you an example. In the infrastructure bill, there was $8 billion appropriated to convert the entire U.S. postal fleet from gas to electric. Well, I talk to the Postmaster General all the time because my committee has jurisdiction over the U.S. Post Office, so I talk to Louis DeJoy all the time. where do you get these? They don't make that many postal vehicles. And in places like Fulton County or Menifee County, which is in the 6th District now, they don't have electric hookups in those counties. So there's really no possible way to convert the entire U.S. postal fleet to electric. I think that'll work in the cities, but it's not going to work in these rural areas. My grandmother was a mail carrier. It's not going to work in a lot of the rural areas today. It will someday. The private sector is wanting more electric vehicles. That's why you're seeing battery plants pop up in Glendale, Kentucky, and Bowling Green, Kentucky, which are good for the economy. I think that the government has to be there to hold bad actors accountable. If someone pollutes the water or if someone's emitting too much carbon, then the government, you have agencies like the EPA that need to be there, and they need to come down on these businesses hard. They need to pay, and they need to govern and make sure and regulate, make sure that it's not happening. But the government is too involved. The government's too heavy-handed, and I think with respect to energy, if the government would get out of the way, I think the oil companies and the energy companies want to do things, even coal in Kentucky. They want to have clean coal. They've invested in clean coal technology. The energy companies are investing in trying to reduce their carbon emissions and have affordable energy with good paying jobs. So I think the problem is the government. I don't think the government's the solution to this. I think the government's the problem. There's a role for government to punish any bad actors and to regulate, but I think we've got too heavy-handed. I think that you've got people that are like Ocasio-Cortez and Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders that are pushing these Green New Deal energy policies that really don't know anything about energy or the climate, other than they love the climate and they want to protect the climate. It's more complex than that. But I think the private sector is moving in that direction. So I'm not a big fan of a lot of these pushes by the government to electrify the postal fleet or to enact Green New Deal policies, which was, a lot of those were in that Inflation Reduction Act.
Okay. In June, the U.S. Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade, and that had for 50 years established the constitutional right to abortion. Do you agree with that ruling back in June, and does that mean that you do not support reproductive rights for women?
I'm pro-life. The Dobbs decision simply allowed the states to decide. So it didn't ban abortion, it just pushed it back to the states. So that's a state issue now. And I think that, the debate now goes to the state legislature.
So do you think that's passing the buck?
Well, the Supreme Court, that's been before the Supreme Court for 40 years. So, that's what they ruled. I don't know. Okay. I don't think that it was passing the buck. I believe in states' rights. So I hope the Supreme Court does that on a lot of other issues.
Well, that's what was my next question. Some fear this is going to lead to a ripple effect on other precedent-setting cases, including civil rights and LGBTQ protections.
Yeah.
Are you good with that?
I don't think that's the case. I think that's a lot of liberals manufacturing a crisis before an election.
Okay. School shootings. It's been heartbreaking.
Right.
Parents, it has school districts, parents, and law enforcement looking for ways to ensure our schools are safe. What policies do you support that encourage safer schools? And does any of this include more common sense gun laws? Is there a common sense gun law?
I think that, as someone who has kids in the public school system, I have 2 kids at Western Hills and 1 at Bondurant, so I'm all in on public education. I want to make sure that when my wife drops the kids off at school, that they're in a safe place. So I support more funding for school security, for school resource officers. I don't support more gun control laws. I'm a firm believer in the Second Amendment, always have been. But I do believe that it's government's responsibility to make sure that those public schools are safe and secure. And I will continue to support funding for more security and more secure school facilities.
Okay. The student loan forgiveness program has been controversial, and it's got opponents and those who support it on both sides. So what congressional measures would you support to control the dramatically rising cost of tuition in post-secondary education?
Well, I've got a lot to say about this. First of all, the president had no authority to appropriate money. You can Google Congress, Google appropriations, who appropriates the money in Congress, and it's clear the House of Representatives appropriates money. I remember Donald Trump appropriated $6 billion to finish the border wall, and Democrats went crazy. He doesn't have the authority to do that, which they were right. He didn't. Fast forward today, Biden just appropriated $300 billion. Trump appropriated $6 billion. Biden did $300 billion. They're fine with that. So there's a lot of hypocrisy on who has the ability to appropriate funds. It's clear only Congress. So number one, it's unconstitutional what Biden did. Number two, my brother didn't go to college. My brother, he's basically a mechanic and farmer and things like that. He's like, why should I have to pay for somebody else's college? I think that the easier you make it to get student loans, the easier that you've made it for a lot of grant programs with college, the more the universities have taken advantage of the situation and raised tuition. I've got a big problem with our universities in America right now. The tuition's too high. They're misleading students on what a value of their degree is. They're cranking students out with worthless degrees. When, if you talk to any employer in America, whether they're in Franklin County or whether they're in McCracken County, they will tell you that their biggest problem right now is they can't find workers. They can't find employees. They don't necessarily look for employees with degrees. They just want people that are going to show up,
Sure.
work hard,
Soft skills,
and pass a drug test,
Yeah.
and do a good job.
Yeah.
Good team player, right? The universities are their business model is at least 20 years obsolete. So
What's
I've got
the
a problem with the
solution?
universities. I don't think that the answer is student loan forgiveness.
Okay.
In my district, we don't have the highest college graduation rate, so it's very unpopular in my district with people that work hard, that pay taxes, that didn't go to college. Think, why should I have to pay for that kid's philosophy degree from the University of Kentucky when I did the right thing and got out of college and started working?
Yeah. I have one more question. And
Got out
before
of
we're
high
done.
school and started working. Yeah, right.
In March of this year, the Kentucky House of Representatives voted 59-34 to pass a medical cannabis bill.
Mm-hmm.
This was the second time the full House ever voted on the issue and the second time that it passed.
Mm-hmm.
Senate leadership refused to assign the bill to a committee, effectively killing the bill for the year. Where are you on this issue?
Yeah, I support medical cannabis. And if you look at one of the biggest problems in Kentucky is opioid abuse, right? We've talked about this issue in Congress, and anytime we debate it, people start calling. I meet people out on the street that truly have pain. There are people that have pain in America. And, if you pass certain laws, it has unintended consequences, and there's always people scared they're not going to be able to get their pain medication. Obviously, opioids have been overprescribed, and doctors should be held accountable for that. But we can't forget there are people that have pain, and a lot of military veterans and older
Sure.
people have pain. So I support alternative forms of pain management. The old business model was, okay, if somebody's in pain, write them a prescription for an opioid. That's been a disaster. My judge friends, I know most of the district judges and circuit judges in the Congressional District, they will tell you, we see old women in court every day that are drug addicts. They may not know it, but the doctors have overprescribed them. So we've got to have alternative forms of pain management, and I think that can be an alternative form of pain management.
Mm-hmm.
So it's something that I support, and I'm probably one of the few Republicans in Congress that support that.
Okay. We don't have an election for governor this year, but we will be having one here in Kentucky next year.
Mm-hmm.
Have you come out to support a particular candidate? Okay, who is that?
I'm supporting Kelly Craft.
Okay.
She is a good friend of mine. She and her husband, Joe, are one of the largest private employers in my district. They own Riverview Mine in Morganfield, Kentucky. They also have a lot of people that live in Franklin County that work in their headquarters office in Lexington for Alliance Coal. So I think that she's running for the right reasons. She is a philanthropist, former ambassador in the Trump administration to the United Nations. She's from Glasgow, which is 30 miles down the road from Tompkinsville, where I grew up. Her dad was actually a veterinarian for my family when I was a kid. He did large animals, and we had a big beef cattle operation. So I've known Kelly for a long time, and I think she would be a great governor for Kentucky.
Okay. Well, at this time, I'm going to let you take over, and you can address our viewers directly and tell them why they need to be voting for you on November 8th.
Well, I really appreciate the opportunity to come before people in Franklin County. I get Frankfurt Plant Board, so I watch this channel occasionally, and I know it's a good channel and has a big reach in Franklin County. I love Frankfurt, as I said in the opener. 11 years as a state representative. I came to Frankfort all the time, back and forth from Monroe County. Then 4 years as Commissioner of Agriculture. So that was 15 years working in Frankfort in some form or fashion. When I was elected Commissioner of Agriculture, I moved my family up here because that's a full-time job. And after my 4 years as Ag Commissioner, when I went back to Monroe County, I always kept my house in Monroe County, I always will. Tried to get my family to come back to re-enroll in schools there. My kids didn't want to leave because they love Frankfort. I have 2 kids at Western Hills High School and 1 that just started at Bondurant Middle School. They love Frankfort. My wife loves Frankfort. So we feel like, Frankfort is a home. It is the home for my kids and my wife. I would love to be the representative here. I've gotten to know a lot of the local elected officials here. I'm going to get to know them better next year. I believe that I've proven in 6 years I can rise very quickly in the House of Representatives. In fact, I don't think anyone's ever moved up the ladder in Congress quicker than I have, especially no one from Kentucky. So I want to be a good representative. I want to be open. I want to be transparent and accessible to the people. And I sincerely ask everyone in Franklin County and Anderson County for your support. For U.S. Representative, I'll be the second person on the ballot under the U.S. Senate race. I'm a Republican. I'm a friendly Republican, but I would certainly appreciate your support November 8th for U.S. Representative.
Thank you. I really do appreciate you coming by today and talking to me
Yep.
and talking to our viewers. It means a lot.
Yep.
And to our viewers, I want to remind you that it's time to get informed because we are in election season. We do want you to go vote on November 8th, and that's why it's so important to hear from our candidates. After you go vote on November 8th, watch us on Cable 10 because we're going to be coming at you directly from the county clerk's office, giving you all the live election returns. It's election season, so that means that your voice is your vote, and I want you to use it. See you next time.